I think in 1980, the one-sheet image prior to social media was absolutely important. It was so essential. It was particularly essential in what I would call low-budget films and the kind of things we specialized in, which were sort of horror movies. Genre movies were really sold through the one-sheets. They'd give us a title, and we'd come up with an image. How I got into art directing one-sheets was a maturation from what I was doing when I started my career at Hustler magazine. We did not accept national advertising. So what we did was we created in-house advertising for sex products. And my approach to these ads, which were vibrators, dildos, all sorts of items that are quite common today in fetish stores, and you can find these anywhere, but back then they were in the back of very sleazy magazines. Well, my approach was to take these products and treat them almost like movie posters, and treat them with a sense of humor and with a bit of parody. And it turned out they were remarkably successful. And at one point, they were bringing more revenue into the magazine than the magazine itself. I took that same approach when I opened my own studio in that same sensibility, developing that single, funny, offbeat image, and moved it into posters. How my studio started is in 1978, April, Larry Flynt was shot. Now, I had been working at the magazine for 3 years as a creative director, and I had complete autonomy at Hustler. After he got shot, I had lost interest in the day-to-day operations of Hustler and decided I wanted to start my own studio. Along with myself, there were two key personnel. There was the director of photography of the magazine, which is a guy named Frank D'Elia, and he and I were an exclusive team at Hustler over the years. I was the conceptualist and the art director, and he was the photographer. We functioned as a team. There was also a writer named Jerry Stahl. He came sort of along as a copywriter. The studio was called Francis Wolf and Associates, and we thought we could turn that into a boutique agency, perhaps record covers, perhaps poster art. And of course, our first clients were obviously, because we had a reputation from Hustler, were sex companies. Well, these companies needed video box covers. For example, the first one we did was something called Hot and Saucy Pizza Girls. Not exactly, Proust, but we did the best we could with it. We would get that name, never, of course, see in the film, have no idea who was in the film, but I would come up with the concept, Frank and I would shoot it, and we would do these wonderfully offbeat, sort of sexy, but really with a sense of humor photos, and they looked beautiful, and it revolutionized the X-rated industry. Not something I would want to, lead my obit with, but it is true. We really are responsible for that. And we were turning out anywhere from 15, 20, 30 boxes, sometimes a month. But eventually it died down because they got too many customer complaints that the box was better than the movie itself. In the early 80s, you have to remember, in terms of how it relates to us, there was the onslaught of horror films. And since we were known for our sort of offbeat images, that was a good market for us. When I art directed, I always thought I was doing a scene from a motion picture. I'll tell you what really was a big inspiration for us was when we first saw Alien. I had thought that was the perfect one sheet. Although it wasn't a still from the movie, I thought it absolutely portrayed the essence of that movie and will shrink down into a tiny little ad, because the most important thing of a one sheet was you always had to imagine what would it look like in black and white reduced to a little page in a newspaper in Kansas City. Does the graphic still hold? Does the image still hold? And that's what we did. If we did something different, it was because it was an assignment that came from the studio and we had to do it. And we always had an aversion to that. So it was one called Take This Job and Shove It, for example. It was absolutely everything we hated. It was awful. But that was the assignment, and so we accepted it. So there were rules depending on the company. Sometimes we would get the job directly from a studio, but most of our jobs came from boutique advertising agencies. They really wanted just the photographic key art, which is what we specialized in. In the case of Dress to Kill, that came from a boutique agency, and the designer of that poster was a man named Tom Martin. Now, Tom Martin was an alumni of Hustler magazine. So Tom had a thumbnail drawing of that idea. When you really think of that poster, it's now considered iconic. But let's think about that for a moment. What is it? It's a guy lurking in a doorway looking at a pair of legs. There's no bigger cliche. And it's the same exact one sheet for The Graduate. It's Dustin Hoffman looking at Anne Bancroft's legs. I always saw it that way. So the concept is really relatively weak, but you can make anything work through execution. We did the one sheet before ever seeing the movie. This is probably a terrible thing to say, but any good image that could support the film, I would probably endorse. If the photo image was really powerful and suggested the film, I think that's enough. And I thought the only thing that will sell this image are the shoes. The shoes have to be deep in the foreground and the stiletto heels. There's nothing more important. It took me 5 days to find those pair of shoes. I went everywhere. It's not like today. Finally, someone told me about a little bondage store in Hollywood, and they had the perfect stiletto heels. The only trouble was her clientele were all men. They were all cross-dressers. So they began in size 11. Brought them back to the studio. We were able to stuff the toe, do everything to make it work, and that subsequently is how we got those shoes. That's really what made the photograph work. And the stalker in the doorway was our construction supervisor, a guy named Paul Peterson, who was an integral part of our studio. And we shot this very slick photo. Frank and I loved the photo. And at this point, we didn't think it would look anything like it ended up in the poster. Tom Martin and his agency, they did something that no one ever did. They reworked our photo. They sort of turned it from this slick, polished photo into sort of a pointillism. I had an aversion to any airbrushing our photos. We did a film, a Mike Newell film with Charlton Heston called The Awakening, an awful film. But we did this beautiful mummy shot. It was one of my favorite shots we ever did. Really creepy and sort of sensual. By the time I saw it, they airbrushed it. It was so far from what we did, I couldn't even show it as an example of our work because it had nothing to do with what we did. But what Tom and his people did was do it in the right way. And when I finally saw that, we both thought, this is a big improvement. They took our photo and played with it, and I think quite successfully. And Tom was always very good at type treatments, going all the way back to his Hustler days. I always thought his logo for Dressed to Kill was absolutely perfect. The perfect typeface for the image, a bit of an elegance to it, a bit of a sophistication. That poster was everywhere. It was also the soundtrack, which I was really proud of that because it was a hero of mine. So to see your own image on a Pino Donaggio soundtrack, I was a fan of quite a few people involved with that film. And incidentally, we did a secondary image. And if you remember the film, Michael Caine would dress up with the wig and the glasses and the leather jacket. I had seen a still of that costume. So I was able to style and find the clothes in Hollywood to match that outfit. And we just hung the clothes in the closet on a hanger. I actually preferred that shot. And back then they did novelizations of screenplays. And that was the cover. And it's been heavily airbrushed and retouched. I don't know when that was done. But the original photo was representative of our style. I was told Brian De Palma chose both the images. So obviously we did something right. I was extremely excited to do a Brian De Palma one sheet because I'm such a huge fan. I mean, I think he's a miraculous filmmaker. And even then, and I go back to Brian De Palma from Greetings, Hi Mom. I remember being amazed seeing Sisters. Of all the one sheets we ever did, that was the one filmmaker who I really admired. And it was nice to know that he liked those. And later to find out that he liked the films we made too. Dressed to Kill showed up in my first adult film, Night Dreams. I recreated the entire bathroom sequence. The fact that after doing Dressed to Kill, only to find out in an interview in Film Comment where they asked Brian De Palma to talk about films that he would define as guilty pleasures, he says Night Dreams, there's a wonderful continuity. You shoot the one-sheet poster, then you make a porn movie of the one-sheet poster, and then the director of the film singles out the movie as a favorite. I mean, there's something sort of perfect harmony. It's wonderful. As opposed to suing us, which I would have assumed he would have done.